Even though the artificiality may be a bit off-putting, there's no denying adding human voice to electronics and games added a bit of realism to an otherwise abstract presentation. Today we'll be looking at some of these bits of chatty fun, on this week's all-singing all-dancing episode of America's Most Wanted.
I calculate your grade for this assignment at C+.
C+? That's crazy. You can't make mistakes. You're a robot.
I'm programmed to be an average 10-year-old. Average 10-year-olds make mistakes.
Well, forget it. I'm reprogramming you to give me an A. Got it?
Got it.
Movies and television have long presented computers as intelligent machines capable of holding complete conversations, even exhibiting the complicated nuances of human speech such as sarcasm. In reality, though, computers are dumb. Getting a machine to output human voice was no trivial endeavor, particularly when the limitations of older hardware made recording and playing back speech samples all but unfeasible. Through format speech synthesis, the waveform could be created by an acoustic model that simulates, more or less, the human vocal tract. Data is still needed, but much less than actual digitized samples.
The machine uses only two sounds produced electrically.
The first device that could be considered a true voice synthesizer would be demonstrated at the 1939 World's Fair in New York City. The device, known as the Vocoder, was derived from Bell Laboratories' Vocoder, developed by engineer Homer Dudley.
Let's see how you put expression into a sentence. Say, she saw me, with no expression.
She saw me.
Now say it in answer to these questions. Who saw you?
She saw me.
Whom did she see?
She saw me.
The device would analyze a human voice and break it down into simplified signals, which are then processed by the synthesizer to output unmistakably artificial, but still recognizable, speech. Its distinctive robotic output found its way into the world of entertainment. Electronic music pioneers such as Lifelike, Giorgio Moroder, and Wendy Carlos, and at times even regular pop artists such as Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder, Phil Collins, and Coldplay have incorporated these retro-futuristic vocals into their work. And if you remember the voices of the Cylons from the late 70s Battlestar Galactica, or Soundwave from the Transformers cartoon, you've heard the modern-day vocoder in action. By the 1970s, specialized speech synthesizer chips by the likes of General Instruments, National Semiconductor, and Texas Instruments were being developed, bringing with it portability as well as affordability. This innovation contributed to the creation of devices that aided those with various disabilities, such as visual or speech impairments. Meanwhile, those same speech chips began trickling into everyday consumer electronics, particularly toys and games. And one of the most enduring toys that would result would be familiar to anyone who grew up in the 80s, or at least has seen the film E.T.
Learning spelling with Texas Instruments Speak and Spell.
Rain. R-A-I-N. That is correct.
She's teaching her brother with Speak and Spell.
H-E-R. That is right.
The idea behind the Speak and Spell originated back in 1976. Four Texas Instruments engineers, Paul Breedlove, Richard Wiggins, Larry Brettenham, and Gene France, were looking for a way to demonstrate the storage capacity of bubble memory. As Texas Instruments had also invested resources in synthetic speech technology, it had been determined that an educational talking toy would serve as the perfect product. With an initial budget of $25,000, a 3-month study to test the idea's feasibility was conducted. Before long, the 4-man team would slowly expand, with members handling various aspects of the product, such as word selection and overall design. Speak and Spell premiered at the 1978 Consumer Electronics Show and would hit store shelves shortly thereafter for a suggested retail price of $50. The product ushered in a new milestone in talking toys. Previously, speech was only accomplished through the use of a plastic phonograph disc like in Mattel's See and Say and Chatty Cathy doll. Texas Instruments' then new line of solid-state self-contained speech chips meant the Speak and Spell had no moving parts. The required words were culled from the machine's memory, processed through the single integrated circuit, and played through a speaker. The device also utilized a vacuum fluorescent display that worked alongside the voice so you could see the word as it was being entered.
For as in for someone. F O-R. You are right.
Speech data uses up a lot of space. Even though the Speak and Spell used the largest ROMs available at the time, 128 kilobits, of which the device utilized a pair, it still only retained 200 words. To expand the device's vocabulary and activities, Texas Instruments released a series of interchangeable cartridges. The Speak and Spell was a worldwide success, with the speech translated to various languages. In the wake of its popularity, Texas Instruments would expand the line with the Speak and Math and the Speak and Read, both released in 1980. Speak and Spell itself went through a couple of revisions, the first in 1980 that saw the raised buttons replaced with a membrane keyboard. A second major revision took place in 1989 with the release of the Super Speak and Spell. This model changed the overall design, most noticeably replacing the vacuum fluorescent display with a liquid crystal display. Cartridges from the earlier models were incompatible with the Super Speak and Spell and vice versa. The Speak and Spell line would be discontinued in 1992. It is still remembered as one of the quintessential toys of the 1980s, as well as a giant technological leap in both synthesized speech and handheld electronics. Speech synthesis would reach the arcades in 1980 with the release of Stratovox by Taito. While the game is a fairly weak vertical shooter in the vein of Space Invaders, or more appropriately Galaxian, the fact that the machine talked was worth at least one hard-earned quarter. As they're being kidnapped, they would yell, "Help me!" At least that's what I think they're saying. A few other voice clips were scattered throughout the game, such as Lucky when the remaining men were being counted, or We'll be back when you thwarted the aliens' abduction plans. The voice quality was quite low, sounding almost like someone talking into their hand through a tin can, and does little to enhance the otherwise prosaic gameplay. That same year, Stern Electronics' Berserk was released. This frantic maze shooter brought along with it a bevy of creepy robot voices played at various pitches. Stern invested heavily in the speech for this game. The compression for each individual word was somewhere in the field of $1,000 each. But this expense definitely shows in the final product. The primitive voice synthesis is clear and effectively unnerving, adding a menacing personality to the enemies.
Intruder alert, intruder alert. Chicken, fight like a robot.
The androids even show off their vocal skills in the attract mode. Electronic speech, both synthesized and digitized, would become more common in the arcade during the 80s.
Our battle is completed, warrior. You were a stimulating opponent.
Even incorporating actual movie sound clips, such was the case in Atari's Star Wars in 1983.
I'm hit but not bad. I don't see what you can do with it.
The additional expenses and hardware needed to add this feature was often worth it, considering it's one way to make a game stand out on an otherwise crowded arcade floor.
Too bad. Space Cadet.
While the local game rooms were getting rather talkative, the console gamers would have to settle on the relatively simple sound effects produced by the second generation hardware. Not that it was technically impossible, as Mike Mika's 2002 voice-enhanced hack of Atari 2600's Berserk had proven, but the additional cartridge memory would render such an endeavor cost-prohibitive. Additional hardware would be necessary to offset this expense, something like Mattel's Intellivoice for the Intellivision console.
First, here's a popular Atari game. Now don't look. And here's new Space Spartans for the Intellivoice module.
Hello, Commander.
Starbase 1 under attack.
At the time, there was a modicum of fascination with talking toys like the Speak and Spell and those aforementioned spacey vocal effects found in music and television that came from Vocoder type devices. Adding synthesized speech to home video games seemed like a logical strategy that would give Mattel's system a leg up on the competition. The Intellivoice acted as an intermediary between the console and the game cartridges, containing a special speech synthesis chip developed by General Instruments.
Mattel Electronics presents Space Spartan.
Stock phrases that would be found on all supporting games, such as Mattel Electronics presents, press, and enter, would be hard-coded onto the chip. Additional game-specific speech data would be stored onto the cartridges themselves, making them a little more expensive than the standard games.
Hyperdrive off. Tracking computer off. Shield off.
The Intellivoice add-on debuted in 1982 at a cost of $100. 3 games that supported the add-on were also released alongside of it: Space Spartans, Bomb Squad, and B-17 Bomber. These special Intellivoice titles were packaged in distinctive tan boxes to differentiate it from normal software.
They'll never do it in time. The code, figure out the code. We'll get them. Replace this third, this first, this second.
Unlike many of the arcade and computer games that utilize speech synthesis, the talking feature in these special Intellivision cartridges were not just there to spice up the audio. The voices were very much part of the game, inasmuch as these titles would be unplayable if you could not hear them.
Wrong order, restart.
Important instructions and information that would otherwise have been provided via on-screen text or symbols were instead conveyed with a disembodied warbly voice that was only barely intelligible. This was a symptom of the extreme space-saving methods Mattel had to employ just to get the data to fit within the tight memory constraints. The lowest sampling rate that would produce a recognizable word was used, often changing the rate a few times within the same word.
Mattel Electronics presents B-17 Bomber.
Owing to its high price tag and a lack of any pack-in, meaning consumers were looking at an initial investment of around $150 to play one single talking game, the Intellivoice did quite poorly in the market. The lack of dedicated games certainly didn't help move any units either. A 4th talking game, Tron Solar Sailor, was released but only sold 90,000 copies. Plans for an international version of the Intellivoice, as well as a white brick redesign to match the Intellivision 2 console, were both cancelled. A 5th game that ran on Intellivision's computer system add-on, World Series Major League Baseball, also supported the Intellivoice. But as the voice was only a supplement to the standard audio, it was not required in order to play the game. As time progressed, memory would both increase in capacity while dropping in price. And with better compression technology, voice clips in games became less of a high-tech novelty and more of a featured enhancement to a game's audio presentation, perhaps added as a selling point.
Yeah, and on top of that, they both died right in front of my eyes.
With the advent of the CD-ROM and its large storage capacity, human voice in video games went from a few choice words to complete lines of dialogue. And these days, games with hundreds of pages of conversation recited by professional voice actors is not all that unusual.
Hal Emmerich. In any case, you should contact Merrill by codec.
But even with these advancements in technology, I still find myself impressed and amused by those old games that took the time to add a touch of humanity to the usual assortment of sound effects. Would Impossible Mission be as memorable without
another visitor? Stay a while. Stay forever.
Would Sinistar have inspired as many nightmares without
I am Sinistar?
Would we have dropped as many quarters into Gauntlet were we not reminded that
help, your life force is running out?
Would I know what game I was playing had Konami not reminded me that I was in fact playing
The Adventures of Fire Billy?
Who knows? Now before you fire up your comment typing fingers to ask why I didn't mention the voice peripheral for Magnavox's Odyssey 2, here it is. But I'm saving any discussion of this for that episode. In the meantime, this was Dave for TeeVee Games. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, the usual.
See you next time.
We are programmed just to do. And we do the work of two. We are the robots. We are the robots. We are the robots. We are the robots.
I'm done.